Hi everyone, welcome back to Andy's Treasure Trove. It's great to be back. You're listening to the music of Candace Roberts, a very smart, funny, and lovely young singer who's a new acquaintance of mine and whom we're all going to get to know in person together when I talk with her in a future episode of Andy's Treasure Trove. Candace's delightful new album, Honeymoon for One, is available now, and you can learn more at CandaceRoberts.com. You know, my fondest wish for this podcast is to make it more of a collaborative effort with you, my devoted audience, and that's why I have a listener call-in phone line that you can call anytime to leave a voicemail message with your comments, questions, and contributions to the show. Here's the number. Please write this down. 415-508-4084. I hope you'll call that number soon and often, and that you'll also tell your friends about the show. In the last dozen episodes of this show, there's been an emphasis on filmmakers, writers, politics, along with some audio adventures exploring some of the more interesting places in the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. The next 2 or 3 episodes of Andy's Treasure Trove are going to be devoted to the performing arts. In today's episode, I'll be talking with a man who's not known as a performer. He's famous for giving some of the biggest entertainers in popular culture their start. His name is Manny Roth, and in the 1960s he had a very famous cafe and nightclub in Greenwich Village, New York City, called Cafe What? That's spelled with a W-H-A and a question mark, that helped catapult acts like Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul and Mary, Bill Cosby, Richard Pryor, Jimi Hendrix, and many, many others to fame and fortune. Surely you've seen movies where at some point the characters go downstairs into a subterranean, smoke-filled nightclub filled with beatniks and hipsters listening to poetry readings and folk music. Well, Manny Roth is the guy who basically invented that whole scene. He'll tell us all about that in just a minute after I tell you about a special contest for this episode. When you're listening to my interview with Manny, at some point he'll mention a special kind of bread that he makes for his children and grandchildren. Simply call my listener call-in line and say the name of that special bread, and you'll be eligible for a drawing, and the winner will receive a brand new Apple iPod Nano. What? You didn't write down the phone number and now wish that you had? Well, you can find it on andystreasuretrove.com on the page titled Participate. Good luck, and I hope you are the winner of the iPod. And now my interview with Manny Roth, who spoke to me over the phone from his home in Ojai, California.
No, before we start, I want you to know I never let facts stand in the way of a good story here.
Okay, we'll take that disclaimer into account.
And another disclaimer, I don't consider my life a big deal. It's mostly waste time and energy. And my genius is I just happen to be in the right place at the right time. So from there, ask me what you want to know, and I'll see if I can fill in a few blanks for you.
Well, thanks. Well, I understand that you started out in Indiana, in a small town.
Yeah, my parents were immigrants. Mom and Dad were from the old country. Dad was from Kiev, that's in Russia. Mom was from what's now Lithuania, but back then it was Poland. She was from Vilna, and it was a marriage of convenience. Dad came here, and he had a horse and wagon, and he used to travel around the countryside and selling whatever he could make a buck on. And he started out, he sold eyeglasses. And Dad told me that his one secret was he would knock on a farmhouse door, and they would try on a lot of glasses. There were no instruments. They would try on till they found a pair they could see with, and they would say how much. And Dad would say $1, and they said I'd take them, and Dad would say for one lens. So anyway, they ended up in a little town in Indiana by the name of Newcastle, and it was an industrial town. blue-collar farmers, and they had a Chrysler plant here to make Chrysler part. And that was the heart and the soul of the town. It was a town of about 10,000, and when the Chrysler part plant was going, the town was up. When the Chrysler plant was down, and it was up and down a lot, depending. It was seasonal. Of course, this was back in the 20s and the early 30s. I was born in 1919, November 25th, around Thanksgiving. And I knew the value of a penny. Yeah, I remember my mom taking me to school on the first day as she walked me across the street. And went to basic school in Indiana. That's grade school and junior high and high school in Indiana. And from there, I went to Indiana University for a year, and I didn't like it. So I told the folks that I wanted to get away from home. So I didn't have any major plans about what I wanted to do. And I had an aunt down in Miami, and I didn't even know if they had a college down there. So I took the chance, and I went down to Miami, and lo and behold, there was the beginnings of the University of Miami. So I graduated from the University of Miami, and probably the most defining moment at the University of Miami was it was a very tiny school back then. I don't think they had 1,000, 1,500 students back then. But I wanted to take a writing course. And I had gone down there at midterm, and they didn't have any creative writing course. But they suggested that I take a playwriting course. And I did. And out of a class of about 30, they picked my one-act play, 3. They picked 3 one-act plays, and mine was one of them to produce. And that was really a defining moment for me, because I saw something that I'd written come alive on stage, and that was exciting for me. I'm not saying it was a good play, but it was a big moment in my life. And I've been trying to write in the playwright form since then, my whole life, off and on, up and down, in and out. And from the University of Miami, I went into service. I volunteered for the Air Corps.
Now, how did you choose the Air Corps?
Well, because they had the best-looking uniforms. I mean, with those, who could beat that uniform there with the wings and the 50 mission hat and the whole karma and a glamour of the Air Corps. And the Air Corps back then was like, how can I say? It was very dramatic back then. It was different than it is today. Today, you take the Air Corps for granted. It's, another branch of the service. But back then, it wasn't a separate service. It was the Army Air Corps and the Navy Air Corps and the Marine Air Corps and so on. And I volunteered for the Army Air Corps. This was during the war, and I went in the early 40s, and I washed out as a pilot, which was a sad day for me. I wanted to be a pilot, but I did solo, and I had about 12 hours of solo time in those two-seater open cockpit bi-wing trainers. And, like those Snoopy airplanes. And so that I'm kind of proud of. And they sent me to navigator school. From there, I became a navigator, and I was a navigator on a B-17 for not a complete tour, but 17 missions, and they were trying to shoot my ass out of the sky, and luckily they missed. And after the war, I volunteered to stay over because I was interested in the theater, and they had an opening with soldier shows. I volunteered to take over the Europe Staging Center for all the USO shows, and I was stationed in Wiesbaden for a year at the old Wiesbaden Opera House. And I had about 28 kids under me. I was the only commissioned officer there. And we sent, they sent us all the entertainment things from all the entertainment units from the States. And we sent them around Europe there. This was after the war. But there were still an awful lot of troops there, and they needed entertainment, and we were the key depot there of the entertainment unit. We had what's her name? This lady who used to see. Let's see, what's her name? When the moon comes up.
Kate Smith.
Kate Smith. Yeah, I remember Kate Smith was there. We were staging the show. The MC came out on stage in front of an audience. We had the Wiesbaden Opera House, and we filled it up with an audience. And he said, "Now we're going to plug into Kate Smith," and he brought down the house. And from there, I used to goof around with the troops there. It was a very loose command because it was after the war. We had our own dining area there. They would call me up on the phone and say, "This is General so-and-so," and I would say, "Fuck off," or something. And one day the general did call, and I told him to fuck off. That's when I left Wiesbaden. I was there about a year, but Wiesbaden was like all of Germany at the time. It was completely wasted. There weren't many buildings left standing in Germany in toto, and Wiesbaden was completely wasted too. And it didn't take any money to live in Germany after the war. Cigarettes were worth a couple $100 a cart, and that was the currency. So when I came home after the war, I had about $2,000 saved up that I hadn't collected, and I didn't have anything better to do. So I opened an Army-Navy goods store in Muncie, Indiana. You've heard of Muncie, haven't you?
At this point in the conversation, Manny's wife called on another line, and he was off the phone for a few minutes. And when he returned, he told me a little bit about his life now in Ohio.
We were married when she was 26 and I was 60. And she is Filipino, a little Filipino girl. And she's everything that I'm not. And it was at a low point in my life. I was the king of the hill for a number of years, and then all of a sudden, sitting on my ass at the bottom of the hill, looking up, and the gods are laughing at me. And they're looking down there, and they say, "Look at that poor schmuck Manny down there." And then one of the gods took pity on me, and he said, "Let's give the poor bastard a break." So they set my wife down and said, "Take care of Manny for a while." And that's a true story. And that's the way it all started. And we've been together for approximately 30 years now. And every day it gets a little sweeter. Now, that's the best story I can tell you. But all I remember about the war and the missions was that I was scared. I wasn't any John Wayne, believe me, and it was scary up there. And yeah, I guess you carry that over. I still have flashbacks today, and I'm 89 already, and I still have dreams, scary dreams about that phase of my life. But I don't worry about that. I wake up to a good world, and I'm a lucky mother. I'm here to tell you. The bottom line is I feel good. I'm in the gym every day. I do my laps every day in the pool, and there isn't anything you can do that I can't do.
I understand you have a secret, powerful breakfast drink that you've had every morning for decades.
Well, it's my goop. I put in a bunch of, I eat what farm animals eat. I make up a bunch of stuff with whole grains and frozen fruit and protein powder and soybeans and sunflower seeds and a lot of nuts and dried fruits. I just make it up as I go along. And when I bake it, I give it to my kids. I can either drink it or I can bake it. And when I bake it, they call it fart bread.
I wonder why.
Well, you have to ask my son.
Yeah. What do you use for liquid when you make it into a drink?
Oh, I just put in yogurt, and I put in a little bit of orange concentrate and a couple of ice cubes and a little bit of water or soy milk and I just mix it up in the blender till I find a taste that I can tolerate. And a big slug of that'll carry you all week.
Wow, all week, wow.
Now, don't mind if I exaggerate a little bit here.
Oh, yes, that's right. I remember the disclaimer.
Yeah, but after the war, I didn't have anything better to do. So a friend of mine who had a connection with Army surplus goods in Cincinnati opened an Army-Navy store, and I did likewise in Muncie. I took my $2,000 and I opened a store, and I eked out a little bit of a living there. Well, I had it about 6-7 years, and my mom and dad helped me out, and my sister, who later became a lawyer, helped me out. The most important thing I have to tell you about my family is that mom and dad, immigrants, remember now. Dad had an accent, a Russian accent, but they worked their asses off. We had 6 kids. I'm number 2. There were 4 boys and 6 girls, and they sent us all through college. Mom and Dad, they worked. I'm telling you, they worked side by side in this blue collar town for most of their lives, and they sent us all. And 2 of my brothers became surgeons. My sister became a lawyer, and my oldest brother became wealthy in department stores up near Chicago. He ended up with department stores. And did I miss anybody?
Yeah, what happened to little Manny?
Oh, myself. I was the wild card. I was the black sheep in the bum. Anyway, after about 6 years in the Army-Navy goods store, I was in my late 20s already, going on 30. And I got fed up with the Army-Navy goods store. And I told the folks I wanted to go to the American Theater Wing on the GI Bill at the time. And they had a very generous GI Bill after World War II. So I did. I sold the Army-Navy goods store, and I had a little income from it. I had $200 a month coming in from a note that the buyer signed. And I went to the American Theater Wing. And I studied with some very good people. And I took a lot of things. I took playwriting and acting and directing, the whole 9 yards for theater. And I studied with some very good people, including Lee Strasberg and Will Lee and, Thelma Schnee, Bill Kirkland, and these names don't mean anything to you, do they?
The first one did, but I'm sorry, I didn't. I'm not familiar with the other ones.
Anyway,
No.
they were important, kind of important. It was a good level of school. The school was great, and they had a lot of good people on the scene back then. Yeah, they had Jason Robard, and Brando was around back then, and a few people that I got acquainted with at the American Theater Wing, and I was there for the better part of 3.5 years, and then I started making the rounds in the city, trying to get work as an actor, and that's a cruel world out there when you're trying to make it as an actor. Because for every job, there's roughly 10,000 people. So the name of the game is rejection after rejection. So talent isn't the biggest requirement. A thick skin is what you need, and that wasn't me. I was living in the village, Greenwich Village. There was a short interruption there when my folks were in an accident, and I had to go back to Indiana for a year and help out. And then I went back to New York and back to the American Theater Wing. But about 1954, I met a young lady in New York, and if you have to handpick the wrong young lady for me to pick out of a crowd to live with, it's got to be this one. I won't mention names here, but she was a 19-year-old, gorgeous redhead from a progressive family. Her father worked for what was the Russian press agency there?
TASS?
What was that? Yeah,
TASS?
TASS, yeah. And she was a neurotic young lady, but we had a very colorful relationship for about 3.5 years. And after I was trying to do some writing at the time and couldn't make any connections, so I figured, well, shit, I'm going to open a theater here, and nobody's going to reject the kid anymore. And I said, now, what kind of a situation can I create here where I can have a theater and a little income, too, to pay the rent? And I didn't have much rent. I was living in the village in a terrific walk-up, one-bedroom apartment with an eat-in kitchen, and I was paying $39.67 a month for it. That was on Christopher Street, just off Sheridan Square. And it was a dynamite apartment. And it was probably the best deal I ever had in my life. And I should have held on to that apartment.
Oh, well, should have.
You should have, yeah. And so I started looking around for a premise to open up a combination theater and coffee house. And I only had a couple of $1,000 to spend. And I found a place on Bleecker Street. Bleecker Street then, well, are you familiar with New York and the Village?
Yeah, I lived in New York for a year.
Where'd you live?
Down in Tribeca.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're familiar with the Village then, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
You know Bleecker Street and
I do
and
indeed.
McDougal Street, right? Well, back then in 1958, when I opened my first joint, Bleecker Street wasn't the Bleecker Street you know today. As you go out on Bleecker Street, it was more like the Bowery. One building there, I forget the name of the hotel, they turned it into a flop house where you could, and there were some Bowery bars there on Bleecker Street. And I found a premise there for $200 a month. Originally, it was a place called the Vatican City Religious Bookshop.
That's a riot.
Yeah, and it was loaded from top to bottom with religious artifacts, and they've had a ton. I mean, literally tons of Art Deco pictures there.
Huh.
And I took everything. The guy left all this junk when he moved out, and I had a mountain of Art Deco pictures. And I'll tell you how I put it together. I got a few. Went over to the Bowery, and I bought a few pieces of kitchen equipment like coffee urns and a little few things for a kitchen that I jerry-rigged myself. I'm pretty good with my hands. And somebody, they tore down an office building not too far from where I was, and they had a couple of truckloads of this very heavy, thick vinyl, that you generally find out in the hallways that they ripped up from the floor. And I had them dump it on my premises, and I leveled the floor off, and I got myself one of those linoleum knives, and I cut it up, and I pieced it together, and I put it down, and that was my floor. Then I pulled in junk tables and chairs from the streets. People throw everything out in New York City. You can find anything on the street. And I pulled in 3 or 4 or 5 beaten up old couches, and I refurbished them as much as I could. And I was out of money then, so I was sleeping there. I broke up with this chick that I'd lived with for about 3.5 years after a while. So I was living on the premises there, sleeping on one of those junky old couches. And I had company there because my couches were at a premium. Yeah, they were one. I don't have to tell you about the village. There are a lot of crazies down there, and I was surrounded by crazies. And a lot of them needed a place to sleep at night. So I would select a few of the crazies to keep me company. And, with what went on down there. And I didn't miss a trick while I was down there. I took all the trips and we went around the block a lot of times. So that's the way it all started. And I called it the Cafe Theater Cock and Bull, and I was going to do whatever. I had a little area there where I was going to, do some improvisational theater. I had a little menu of coffee and concoctions and soft drinks and ice cream, and do my theater thing. And nobody was going to reject me anymore. And I opened up, and I did it all. I cleaned the toilets, and I mopped the floor, and I made the coffee and fried the hamburgers, and I slept there. And I made sure the rent was paid. And that's about all that was coming in at the time, because Bleecker Street at that time was no man's land. It was more like the Bowery than it was the village that you're familiar with. But I did survive, and then a guy by the name of Tommy Ziegler, a good friend of mine, who ran a place called the Figaro. It's right on the corner on the southeast corner of Bleecker and McDougal. There was a premises on McDougal Street where I ultimately opened the Cafe Wa. You ever hear of the Cafe Wa? Well, it was in the basement, and it was originally a stable. And this was about 2 years after I opened my original place, and that was still there. My original place was still there, so they overlapped. And the most interesting things somebody gave me a beat up a microphone and an amplifier for the original place, then my cafe theater, where I was cleaning the John, and I didn't have any lights, any stage, any sound, anything. And they gave me a beat up amplifier and a microphone, and I built a little platform, put up one light, and the poets used to get up there. And the folkies used to come in with their guitars and sit around and do their things. And on the weekends, I didn't do much business except on Friday and Saturday night. And you know the village on Friday and Saturday night. It's a mob scene down there. It's a tourist mecca, and all the kids come in from all the boroughs, and the bridge and tunnel crowd come in from Jersey, and it's a mob scene. I remember one Saturday night, I took in $500, and man, that was a big deal for me, and that was the peak of my career. And then these premises came along in 1960. It was a stable downstairs on McDougal Street, just below 3rd, between 3rd and Bleecker. And I looked at it, and for some reason, I figured out Tommy Ziegler said, "Manny, go take a look at this premise." They offered this to me, but it's a basement thing. I don't have any use for it. So I went to look at it. It had about almost 3,000 square feet down there, but it was obviously still a stable. It had a trough running down the center of it, and it had a ramp running from the street down to it. There was no entrance until this guy came along and bought the building, opened up a theater, street level, and he wanted to rent the basement out. But who would want the friggin' basement? Nobody but an idiot like me. So I went down there, and he put a stairway down there, and you talk about primitive. I should have kept it as a stable, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I thought it was going to be. I didn't plan this thing out way ahead. I didn't say, "Manny, what you're going to do? You're going to open a showcase here for people who are going to become stars." I wasn't that bright.
Well, probably if you had tried to, you wouldn't have been able to.
Well, I was going to open, I thought, I had an idea. I was going to open a place called the Slide-In Cafe, and I was going to put a slide in. But that turned out to be against the law. Then I was going to put down in a combination paperback bookstore. I had somebody who was going to do the paperbacks, and I was going to do the coffee house. That made sense. You sit around, like Starbucks. So I was a little before my time. Well, I called in all my friends again, and I said, "Do your thing down here." Mainly the artists. And they did. And we didn't have much to work with, but they all came up with something. They painted a lot of things on the walls and did a lot of weird, crazy things. And there was no particular theme. And that's why I called it the Cafe Wa, because anybody who came in there, they stood at the door, and it was a wild scene, I'm telling you. They would look up there, and they would say, "What the fuck is this?" And that's why I called it the Cafe Wa. What I did, I didn't know I was creating a fire trap.
Oh.
But I took rolls and rolls of burlap, and I hung it from the ceiling because there was nothing but dirty rafters and pipes up there. And then I took spray paints and sprayed the burlap. And I'm telling you, it was a weird scene down there. So what I did, I bought a dozen truckloads of scrap marble, broken marble, chunks of discarded marble. And I got a few bags of concrete down there, and I got down on my hands and knees, and I laid that floor down there. And if you go down there today, that floor is still there. And the folkies would come in there, and the poets would come in there. And then I remember the first day I opened the Café Bois, I was expecting, to make a lot of money. And it was a weekday. I think I opened on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and I made $8 the first day I opened. And I had nothing to offer down there except I spray painted some signs up front, and they were weird too. It was all jerry-rigged. I had the broken tables and chairs, and on the weekend the people started coming down. The McDougal Street is a mob scene. It looked like a colorful thing from the entrance. They started coming down, but I still didn't make a buck out of it because I was still selling 35-cent coffee. And then we started with the poetry readings, and the poets wanted a place to read. So on the weekends, it started with the poets, and the folkies would sit around and do their things. And that's the way it started. Finally, I built a little platform, and then a light, and then an El Cheapo a mic and amplifier, and then it just grew from there. And then I started charging a quarter on the weekends. That's where most of the traffic was. And I raised it to $50, and no resistance. And I started to, make a little money. And I was happy with that. Then I raised it to $1. And that was a lot of money back then, back in the 60s. Then I raised it to $2. And before you know it, was up to $3 and $4, $5. And people were paying just to get in. But by then, it grew exponentially, like Topsy. I formalized the stage. I put in good lights, good sounds. I started booking the talent. And at first, we would take up a collection because I couldn't afford to pay the entertainers. But after a while, after I started charging a cover, then I started paying the talent. We started out with Lou Gossett and Godfrey Cambridge. They came over from the Negro Ensemble Theater back in the early 60s. And Peter, Paul, and Mary. Peter and Paul worked for me as singles, as folk singers. Mary worked for me as a waitress. And Bob Dylan and Lou Gossett said, Manny, let's do a hootenanny. So I said, what the fuck's a hootenanny, Lou? And he said, well, it's an open mic. You invite wannabes in. And we did. And Dylan used to come in. I remember the first time he came in, he was just a kid. He wasn't Bob Dylan then. He was still Bobby Zimmerman. And I don't think he was out of his teens yet. But he said, Mr. Roth, he said, I'm new in town here. He said, I don't have a place to sleep tonight. So I got up on the mic and I said, we have this new kid in town and he needs a place to crash tonight. And he's got a guitar. And somebody took him in and he never forgot that. And he wrote about it in his book when he did his book. Woody Allen and Bill Cosby, Richie Pryor, Jimi Hendrix, and Tiny Tim was there, and Dino Valenti from the Quicksilver Messenger Service, and and The Lovin' Spoonful, and there were a million kids. Lenny Bruce was around. He didn't work my place, but he occasionally would come in and do something. I never booked him. There were a lot of characters around too, like Bodenheim and Eugene O'Neill's son. I used to hang out with him. He was a drunk, but an interesting guy. And then I knew Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. Valerie Solanas, do you know who that is? She's the gal who shot Andy Warhol. But she was one of the real crazy. And all the kids from the Warhol scene, like Johnny Brandt and Lou Reed. And I had everything down there, you name it. Whatever was happening in New York. I had steel drums down there. I had a mixed bag. I had a hypnotist down there. I had gospel. I had jazz. I had Tiny Tim. I had.
Well, I understand, speaking of Richard Pryor, that you were Richard Pryor's first agent and that you had to bail him out of jail once.
I remember somebody was heckling him, and he jumped off the stage and stabbed the guy with a fork. One story about Pryor. They booked him on the Tonight Show. Well, I was with him. His very first TV gig was the Rudy Valley Show, and I went with Pryor to the first Tonight Show. And there was another guy by the name of Pryor. Something Pryor, who did some comedy drawings. But when Carson did his monologue, and then he said, "Tonight we have so and so and so and so," and he said, "We've got this guy." Let's see. He said he didn't call him Richard. He called him the other guy's name. I forgot, Danny or Randy, or let's say Randy Pryor.
Okay.
So, but he got his name wrong. So Pryor came out. Now you got to remember, this was back in the late '60s. That was a different time era back then. And Pryor was scared and nervous, of course. But he went out there, and Carson tried to make him comfortable. And the first thing Richie said, he said, "You got my name wrong." he said, and Carson went along with it. And he said, "Well, what do they call you?" And Pryor says, "Well, most of my friends call me that crazy, the N-word."
Oh, no.
And it was like all the air went out of the room. And then it was a count of about 10, and the room just exploded. I mean, they never heard anything like that. Yeah, if you ever get a chance to see that first Richard Pryor clip, that's the way he started out. And from there, he started to gain reputation. But he really didn't become the Richie Pryor that you know until he freaked out in Vegas, about 10 years after he started. I remember once he worked for me for about a couple of years, and he was okay. He was okay. And I used to try to book him at other places, and I took him to a place called the Living Room, also on McDougal Street. And Pryor got up there, and he was kind of confident at the time. And he introduced me, and he said, one of these generic things, everything I am, I owe to this guy over here. I'm working today and I love him, and so on and so on. Then they bombed. So we walked out with our tails between our legs. I opened another comedy club at the top of the village gate in the 80s, late 80s. And I had all the kids you see on the tube now, including Seinfeld and Ray Romano and Leary, Dennis Leary. But the best one of all, I'll tell you, was a guy by the name of Bill Hicks. Bill Hicks. He wasn't anything like Lenny Bruce, but he was the best of the lot. And poor Bill died in his early 30s of lymphoma. And I'll tell you, if you want to get more, check Letterman. Yeah, Letterman loved him too. He had him on the Letterman show.
I want to ask you, I know that some of your stories, some of the ones maybe you've told us and some other ones can be found in the autobiography of David Lee Roth. Why are you in David Lee Roth's book?
Oh, he's my brother's kid. I'm his uncle.
I knew that. He seems like he's a pretty wild and crazy guy.
Well, he is pretty wild, but he wouldn't carry the name Roth, and he wouldn't be my brother's kid if he didn't have a head on his shoulders. He's a smart kid too, and he's not one of these kids who's going to end up broke. Yeah, he's a wild and crazy kid because that's the image. And he'll tell me, he says, Uncle Manny, it's all hype. But he is good. He's great at what he does. And I went to see him during his most recent tour at Staples, and I went back to see him, and I still find him awesome. I told him, I said, it was like the second coming.
No, wow.
Well, I'm telling you, when he reunited with Eddie and Van Halen, I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I went backstage and he wasn't receiving anybody. My wife and I walked in, there wasn't anybody there, and because I understand the situation with he and Eddie is still kind of sensitive. So he plays it with kid gloves, and he doesn't entertain anybody after the concert. But my wife and I went back to see him, and I told him, I said, kid, I said, it's one thing to be the uncle of a rock star. It's another to be the uncle of the Messiah. I said, now which is it? Are you really the second coming here? And we laughed it up a little bit, and then I left. But it was incredible, just friggin' incredible to see that scene there. But then, on a different note, I made a ton of money, and I was the king of the hill. And then at the end, I lost it all.
Mm.
I mean, one day I'm sitting on top of the friggin' hill, and the next day I'm on my ass at the bottom, looking up. It was all gone. I was broke, in trouble, in litigation, strung out. I had 3 kids without a home, a broken marriage, and in litigation up to my elbows. So on that note, if you want to pick up at another time, I had to start climbing back up the mountain again. I'm only 89. One of these days I'll be discovered. I'm still looking to be discovered here.
Manny Roth, thank you so much.
It's been nice talking to you, Andy.
Likewise. This has been episode number 12 of the Andy's Treasure Trove podcast. All rights reserved by Andy Moore and Treasure Trove Productions. I'd like to thank my new muse and future guest, Candace Roberts, for her music on today's episode. And of course, many thanks to Manny Roth, who was very kind to participate in my show, and to Michael Zucker and Brandon Roth, who helped me connect with Manny. Next time, on episode 13, we'll be talking to singer Richard Conrad about a completely different part of the entertainment spectrum. Richard is a performer of quote-unquote serious music from the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries. Richard has recorded classical albums with people like Joan Sutherland and Marilyn Horne, and he'll also be telling us some stories about his humorous encounters with people as diverse as Noel Coward and Adlai Stevenson. So be sure to listen to the next episode of Andy's Treasure Trove, coming soon, I promise. Meanwhile, please visit andystreasuretrove.com. I've added lots of new things to the site, and I think you'll enjoy it. Bye for now.
There's big fat garbage coming out of your mouth. There's big fat garbage coming out of your mouth. There's big fat garbage coming out of your mouth. big fat